Most women don't realize when it begins. It starts small, a single thought, a ripple in the silence. But that thought refuses to leave. It loops, it multiplies, it grows louder in the quiet, and before she knows it, her mind is no longer hers. She doesn't just think, she spirals. One thought becomes 10, then 100. All of them demanding certainty. All of them whispering disaster. What if you forgot something? What if you made a mistake? What if you never get peace unless you fix this? So she tries, she thinks harder. She rewinds, replays, rechecks, reviews. She becomes the curator of imaginary catastrophes. And even when she knows the fear is irrational, she can't stop. Not because she's weak, but because her brain has turned her thoughts into alarms and her nervous system believes it's fire. Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz calls it the OCD loop, a neurological cycle where the brain sends false danger signals, trapping the mind in endless checking, reviewing, and compulsive analysis. It's not imagination. It's not overreacting. It's a brain caught in its own echo chamber. But that loop didn't appear from nowhere. Jung would say it formed in the shadow, the part of the self exiled from love. And for many women, that exile began long before the obsessions, before the rituals, before the shame. It began the moment she believed, if I don't control everything, something terrible will happen. That belief didn't come from logic. It came from experience, emotional chaos, abandonment, sudden loss, and a child's mind made a sacred vow. If I can keep everything perfect, I'll be safe. Now, decades later, the vow still lives not in words, but in the spinning. The endless mental spinning is not laziness. It is not attention seeking. It is not just anxiety. It is an overactive survival system searching for certainty in a world that offers none. She has learned to think as if her life depends on it, to analyze feelings as if they are threats, to manage people, spaces, words, and outcomes as if she were holding up the sky. But the sky was never hers to hold. And still, her mind spins. Because she doesn't trust the silence. She doesn't trust the unknown. She doesn't trust herself. Dr. Schwartz teaches that healing begins with relabeling, calling the intrusive thought what it is, a brain glitch. But deeper than that, the healing begins with this quiet knowing. This thought is not me. This urge is not truth. I do not need to fix what is not broken. But to do that, she must first stop dancing with the fear. She must let the loop spin without joining it. And that for someone who has built their life on hyper-control, feels like death. The hardest thing for a woman with OCD is not the thought itself. It's not acting on it, not soothing it, not fixing it, not responding. It is in this sacred pause, this refusal, that something else arises. A stillness she forgot existed, a breath without panic, a self that was never broken, only scared. And in that moment she realizes the mind doesn't stop spinning because you feed it more thoughts. It stops when you stop believing it needs to be fixed. Because maybe the spinning isn't the problem. Maybe it's the map. Maybe it's pointing to the part of you that's still waiting to be held. She begins to notice it. The pattern beneath the panic, the rhythm behind the fear, it always starts the same way. Something small, a flicker, a phrase, a question she didn't invite, but it doesn't feel small. It feels like fire in her chest, like acid behind her eyes, like if she doesn't solve it now, something will collapse. The room, the relationship, herself. So she chases the feeling with logic. She tries to reason, tries to prove it wrong, tries to pray it away, or confess, or run it through 100 internal filters. But none of it works. Because what she's trying to do isn't solve a problem. She's trying to escape a feeling. Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz teaches that the OCD brain misfires, sends false alarms that get stuck. And the more you obey the alarm, the more power it holds. But in her body, it doesn't feel like science. It feels like guilt, like danger, like drowning in clarity she can't grasp. Because beneath the obsession lives a wound. She doesn't trust herself. This isn't new. This was carved into her long ago. Maybe by a parent who changed moods like storms. Maybe by a teacher who made perfection a requirement. Maybe by a religion that made doubt feel sinful. Maybe by a trauma no one ever named. Whatever it was, it taught her that her mind couldn't be trusted. That safety lives in certainty. That peace only comes when everything is just right. So now, every time a thought arises that doesn't feel pure, she panics. Every time a memory seems blurred, she spirals. Every time she feels unsure, she ruminates, replays, resets, not to feel better, but to not feel bad. But the truth is, she doesn't even believe the thoughts anymore. She just doesn't know who she is without responding to them. This is where the brain and the soul entwine. Jung would say she is stuck in the complex, an emotional knot from the past, looping in the present. Schwartz would say she is rewiring the circuit every time she notices the thought, names it, and chooses not to engage. And both would agree. Healing is not about eliminating the thought. It's about breaking the ritual of identification. Because every time she pauses, every time she lets the thought burn without acting, she creates space. Not silence, not peace, not at first, but space. And in that space, something ancient stirs. Something that remembers what it felt like. To live before fear. She sees a glimpse of it, the self that doesn't need to check. The self that lets things be unresolved. The self that can sit with not knowing and still choose softness. It terrifies her. To not obey the voice? To not fix the tension? To not perform the ritual of safety? What if something does go wrong? What if this time it is real? And then comes the whisper, the sacred, knowing she's only just begun to hear. Let it go wrong. Let the thought be true. Let yourself feel the fear and stay anyway. Because the only way out of the spinning is through. Not through thinking. Not through fixing. Through not moving. And in the stillness she once avoided like death, she finds something unexpected. She is still here. Even when the thought screams. Even when the guilt claws. Even when the fear surges. She is here. And that means, for the first time in years, she doesn't have to believe everything her mind says, just because it speaks with urgency. She doesn't have to fix this moment to be whole, because maybe she already is. She starts to see the pattern not as punishment, but as a message, a sacred signal from the unconscious, asking not to be silenced, but to be understood. The thoughts are no longer just symptoms. They are symbols. The mind is screaming because something deeper has never been witnessed. And the more she tries to control it, the more it resists, because the thoughts don't want control. They want compassion. Every intrusive spike is a doorway. Every compulsion is a question. Am I safe? Am I allowed to exist without fixing something first? If I stop performing, will I still be loved? Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz reminds us, you are not your thought. You are the observer, the watcher behind the wave, the stillness behind the storm. And so she watches. When the thought arrives like fire, she doesn't panic. She places a hand on her chest and whispers, I see you. You're scared. But I'm here now. She doesn't argue, doesn't explain. She just stays. This is the hardest thing she's ever done, because everything in her screams for certainty. Her muscles tighten. Her jaw locks. Her breath shortens. She wants to run, to erase, to recheck, to confess, but instead, she waits. And in the waiting, in the deliberate non-action, she breaks the spell. The loop isn't gone, but it's weaker. It loses its grip the moment she stops feeding it. She realizes now. She used to mistake control for safety. But control was the cage. And the key was always surrender. Not surrender as in giving up, but surrender as in letting go of the illusion that she was ever in charge of everything. Jung called this the individuation process, becoming whole by integrating the parts of ourselves we once exiled. And this part, this frightened, hypervigilant, obsessive self, it isn't evil. It isn't defective. It's the child who was never told. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to be uncertain. You don't have to earn love with perfection. She grieves because for years she believed that thought control was self-control. That the cleaner her mind, the more worthy she was. That her fear made her a danger when really it made her human. She begins to understand it was never about the thought. It was about what the thought protected her from feeling. Guilt, grief, shame, unworthiness, longing, all of it locked beneath layers of rumination. But now, layer by layer, she lets go. She doesn't wait for the thoughts to vanish. She walks forward with them. When the thought says, you have to fix this, she replies, number I have to live. When the mind screams, you're not safe, she whispers, I know, and I still choose peace. This is how she rewires her brain. Not with violence, not with force, but with rituals of resistance, daily sacred refusals to abandon herself again. And that's what this is in the end. The unlearning of fear, the reparenting of the nervous system, the slow, beautiful rebellion of no longer checking. She is still the same woman, still living with the same mind. But now she walks with her eyes open, not wide from terror, but wide from truth, that she was never broken, only scared, and that she doesn't need to solve every thought to be free. She just needs to choose presence over panic, stillness over spinning, self-trust over reassurance. And when the thought comes again, and it will, she smiles. Not because she's cured, but because she finally knows the thought has no power unless she gives it permission. And now the loop begins again, but something is different. It doesn't arrive like a monster anymore. It arrives like an echo. Familiar, yes, but no longer absolute. The panic still stirs, the breath still shortens, but somewhere deeper, she's watching. She's awake. She doesn't need the loop to disappear to be at peace. She doesn't need her mind to be silent to trust her own presence. She only needs this. The space between the thought and her reaction. That's where her power lives now. In that sacred pause, in the moment she chooses not to explain herself, not to prove her innocence, not to replay the memory again and again until it breaks. She is learning the art of letting the thought float, like a leaf on a river, like a gust of wind that doesn't require interpretation. She no longer gives it meaning, no longer makes herself wrong for having a mind that pulses, stings, and repeats. Instead, she offers it something radical, stillness. She walks into a room without scanning. She leaves the house without checking. She feels the surge of uncertainty and doesn't flinch. The thoughts come, what if you're a bad person? What if you made a mistake? What if you never feel right again? And she answers, not with rituals, but with presence. That's just fear talking. That's just my brain misfiring. That's not me. Because she knows now, healing isn't in the absence of thoughts. It's in the refusal to follow them blindly. Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz called it revaluing, choosing to see the thought for what it is, meaningless noise. And when she practices that, moment after moment, something inside her rewires. She's no longer addicted to relief. She no longer lives for the brief silence that comes after a compulsion, because she doesn't need the noise to end. She just needs to stop believing it. And in that refusal, she becomes someone entirely new. She becomes a woman who no longer waits for certainty, who no longer checks the door 3 times to feel safe, who no longer apologizes for being too much or too sensitive or too chaotic, who no longer thinks she has to be clean, correct, good, or perfect to be loved. She no longer performs healing. She embodies it in stillness, in honesty, in small rebellions, over and over, until her nervous system no longer fears stillness. And maybe the thoughts will always come. But now they arrive to someone who is not afraid of them. She is not the girl who panics at shadows. She is not the woman who checks her worth at the altar of control. She is not the mind that loops. She is the one who chooses, the one who stays, the one who says, I am not here to fix. I am here to live. And with that, the spell is broken. Not because the mind is quiet, but because she finally is. She walks forward, not as the one who conquers her thoughts, but as the one who no longer fears them. The woman who needs no certainty, asks no permission, seeks no ritual. Only her own presence, her own breath, her own stillness. And that woman, she doesn't chase peace, she becomes it. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.